You're listening to the Vin Wine Podcast, where you'll hear interviews and stories from around the wine world. From writers and critics to winemakers and sommeliers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping wine culture. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Vin Wine Podcast. I am your host, Billy Galenko, and we are here with a fantastic episode, including our first interview with a winemaker from South Africa. We have Matt Day, head winemaker at Klein Constantia, and it's really exciting for me to start with not only a prestigious South African wine, but also one of the most historically prominent throughout history. Napoleon is famed for possibly having his last drink be the Vin de Constance from Klein Constantia. So really excited to talk to Matt today. He actually talks about how he was able to try a wine that possibly Napoleon drank the same vintage of. It was from the 1700s. So that is a really interesting interview, and we will get to more on Matt in a minute. But first, we have a couple news articles that we want to touch on. And I've purposely chosen articles this week that loop into the greater themes that we're talking about with Matt today. So the very first article is a Jancis Robinson 10-year kind of review, if you will, on South African quote-unquote new wave wines. She tasted some of these wines in 2015 and went back and tasted them again in 2025. Now, you can find this linked in our wine news, but what I really wanted to focus on here is not necessarily her specific sentiments per se and the exact scores she gave, but the idea that I think more people should be exploring South African wine, and that South African wine has come a long way. I think many wine drinkers, when they think about South African wine, if they know much or anything about it, maybe the first thing that they think of is Pinotage, that great variety that is a cross of Pinot Noir and that has a mixed reputation. And in recent years, it's been made really well. In the far past, it had been made poorly and gained a little bit of a negative reputation. But South Africa has a lot of wine growing regions, and it's come a long way growing many different varieties beyond what people were kind of considered just Pinotage and maybe just Sauvignon Blanc, which is also known as Steen down there, Steen. And a lot of this has to do with after, I guess we won't have to go into too far, but for a large portion of the 1900s, a lot of South African winemaking was managed by the government, and there was a lot of restrictions on certain things that people could and could not do to make their wines better in terms of both in the winery and in the vineyards. It's a fascinating history. If you guys want to learn more about that, I will put a link into the notes of a South African wine history book that I had gotten into a couple years ago. But in recent years, with these rains off in the past 30 years or so, things have really started to blossom. There's many different regions. They're growing wines and a wide variety of wines, for example, across the whole country. One that really stands out, and I've had a bunch of really good quality wines, but also great value wines from the Swartland area recently in the past couple of years. This area is known for its ancient vines. There's a lot of really old vines there. It's a drier area, so a lot of old vines have been able to survive, even though they haven't maybe been kept up really well for certain parts of their history. This includes a lot of old vine Syrah, old vine Chenin. So I really encourage people to go seek out wines from Swartland. And of course, Constantia, where our guest is from today, is having its own renaissance, which is right there next to Cape Town. Stellenbosch obviously has its reputation as well. There's an area called Hemelanard, which is a high quality, up and coming, or I guess it's established, but still growing in terms of reputation area for cool climate wines. So that's Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir is also coming out of there. And there's a number of regions that are really worth exploring. So again, this whole episode is really focused on South African wines. So I highly recommend everybody go seek some out, especially the wines from Klein Constantia, which I think you'll be really excited about, but also some of these other producers and some of that old vine Swartland wine as well. The second news article I want to touch on today has to do with something that Matt talks about a lot in our interview, and it's Sauvignon Blanc. He mentions how Sauvignon Blanc is one of the less maybe popular varieties. I think Sauvignon Blanc has come a long way in taking over or becoming more and more popular among wine drinkers, taking over kind of from Chardonnay, at least where I live in the US. I know a lot of people are really leaning into the grassy tropical fruit notes for some of these Sauvignon Blancs, but then I also know a lot of my sommelier friends who love the depth and complexity you can get from some of the wines from Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé. So I think there's fantastic breadth of Sauvignon Blanc out there. And I know a lot of people have to have at least one Sauvignon Blanc on their wine list here in the US among my sommelier friends. So wanted to touch on Sauvignon Blanc as Matt goes into all of the nuances of growing Sauvignon Blanc in South Africa. But this article is from Wine Searcher. It's the most expensive Sauvignon Blancs of 2025. And I think what's interesting here is a lot of people don't really equate Sauvignon Blanc with really expensive wines. And I think that's just because of the most common styles that are available. It's definitely a wine or a grape variety that can produce wines of immense depth and complexity and that can mature well. But it's interesting just to see what the most expensive ones, at least on Wine Searcher, are right now. The first one coming in number one of the most expensive is the Screaming Eagle Sauvignon Blanc. This one is just because of its rarity and the name associated with it. So I think that's something that's really interesting to see. But then the next few down the line are still above $1,000. They're special edition Dagenau bottles that are produced. You have the Asteroid bottling, the Clos de Calvaire bottling, as well as Memento Mori bottling as well. But then following that up, so then that is where the $1,000 average Wine Searcher price drops. And then you go down to the sub $400 mark. And some of these I think were interesting. One is the Edmond Vuitton Sancerre. If anybody has never seen these bottles, they are really pretty. They have a really unique label. Very cool looking wine. I've actually never tasted it. A bunch of my friends have. They say it's great. But this is a wine that kind of just came on my radar in the past couple of years. So I definitely worth checking out. It's always very expensive, but I've heard it's a great bottle. And then coming down, before you get to other bottlings by Dagenau that may be a little more approachable, like the Silex or also the Pure Song that I had a couple weeks ago, we have a couple wines that aren't from the Loire. The Pavillon Blanc from Margaux, which is very cool, as well as the Ornellaia Bulgari Bianco. I actually did not realize that they made a Sauvignon Blanc under the Ornellaia label, so that is very exciting. And then the rest of the list goes down into you would expect in the sub $300 range, but from the top producers in Loire, including Dagenau, Vacheron, and that about rounds out the top 10. So something very cool to think about. I think people should definitely think more about Sauvignon Blanc and the nuances that the grape can provide and the way it can express its terroir. And that's what I want you to think about when you're going into this interview with Matt as well. He really talks about some of the differences between their parcels and the vinification techniques of their Sauvignon Blanc, and it's something to really, really look into. And now we'll get to the interview shortly, but a little bit more background on Matt. He was trained and went to school for winemaking and traveled around the world before becoming the head winemaker at Klein Constantia. He worked in both the United States, Australia, and also spent time in France. And he actually ended up at Klein Constantia. And you guys will hear me in the interview say Klein Constantia and some other names. I learned throughout the interview how to properly say it. So excuse my poor South African accent, but Klein Constantia. Matt arrived and he has a really interesting story about how he got his first job, but he started really young and then the winery underwent a management change and he was able to stay on and quickly rise through the ranks to become the head winemaker. And he's been there for, I think well over a decade now. So you guys will learn a little bit more about how he came to the winery and what their new focus is on. They really focus on bringing the Vin de Constance, which is their traditional sweet wine, the one that Napoleon apparently had or supposedly had on his deathbed, back to its international glory, which they're doing great work with that. He talks about how that wine's made and how it differs from other sweet wines, some of the most famous sweet wines in the world. And then he also talks about their Sauvignon Blanc. If you listen to the 5 questions with him, you really notice that's something that they're looking forward to and they're emphasizing, but it's the most planted grape at their winery, at their vineyard estates. And they're really looking into how to express it in different ways, taking a lot of notes from the top producers in Loire. Dagenau is really one of his touchstones and a style that he looks to not necessarily replicate, but to inspire what the work that he does at Klein Constantia. So I hope everybody learns a lot about the wines that can be produced in this area, as well as the winery as a whole. It's one of those old school legendary wineries from history, and you guys all know I love my wine history, so it's just interesting to have this name that people have been sharing for hundreds of years in the world of wine, making its its full comeback from maybe a little dip that it had post phylloxera and really bring it back to prominence. So really excited to have Matt on. I hope everybody enjoys the interview. And without further ado, here is Matt Day, head winemaker at Klein Constantia. Matt, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on the show.
Yeah, no, I was really excited. We haven't had any South African wineries on, and we've been really looking forward to having some producer because South Africa is really growing, and I'm excited to start with such a historic winery. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how you got to Klein Constantia, and then we'll dive into the history and the wines you make?
Yeah, sure. I probably started off as one of the youngest winemakers in the Cape to work at a top property. And obviously, Klein Constantia is historic. We have 340 years of history. We're the oldest New World producer out there. And I landed up as head winemaker at Klein Constantia at the age of 26. Crazy story. I graduated at Stellenbosch University. My first ever job, I had an internship at a wine farm called Meerlust in Stellenbosch. And during my studies, I decided, well, this internship, I thought it'd be nice to drink some wine with my mates and make a barrel of wine. So I bought some Syrahs, I bought a barrel, and I made it at Meerlust that year during my final year of university. And that was the start of my journey into winemaking. So I made this barrel of wine, forgot about it for a year and a half at Meerlust, graduated, moved to Australia, worked in the Barossa Valley. And then in between a harvest in the Barossa Valley and Saint-Emilion in Bordeaux in France, I bottled that wine and I somehow landed up with an intern position or interview at Klein Constantia with the winemaker Adam Mason. And I just bottled this wine. I actually happened to have a magnum of Syrahs in my boot that I just bottled. And fortunately, I walked into the job interview at the desk that I'm sitting at now, and I slapped a magnum of Syrahs on his table. I said, listen, yeah, we have to try this wine. I've made it. If you like it, you have to give me the job as an intern. And he loved it so much, or he loved the concept so much that he gave me the position as intern. A year later, I became the assistant winemaker at Klein Constantia. And then the crazy thing happened in 2011 that Klein Constantia was sold to the new shareholders of Klein Constantia. And Adam, with the sale of Klein Constantia, decided to move on to Stellenbosch to make wine in Stellenbosch. And the new owners of Klein Constantia landed up with a very young assistant winemaker. They walked in and they said, well, look, Matt, you've been here for a couple of years. We'll give you a chance, and just one chance. If you mess up, there's the door. But if you do well, then you can stick around and have an incredible career at Klein Constantia. I'm still here today. I'm loving life. They haven't gotten rid of me yet. And yeah, I've had an incredible journey with Klein Constantia. I've also worked all over the world, which is, it doesn't really happen often for many South African winemakers.
Yeah. Wow. That is quite the journey there. I do have to ask, how was that first wine you made when you tasted it at your job interview? Was it good?
So we didn't actually land up tasting it. We tasted it in 2011 when Adam actually left. We drank it together. It was in this office for the whole entire time. And it was stunning, incredible wine. But I'm a little bit biased because that got me the foot into the door at Klein Constantia.
Working around the world, how did that prepare you, or how does it still inform what you're doing at Klein Constantia? Because I feel like there's some wines that you make there that are unlike anything else in the world, and then there are other wines that maybe you could be informed by other wine regions.
Yes, I think any gift for any young winemaker is to experience as many terroirs and other winemakers as possible. So ideally, you need to build up a database of theories and ideas and concepts from as many winemakers out there as possible. And hopefully, out of the box thinking winemakers. Working in Barossa, I learned a lot about red winemaking and just having fun. Working in France and in Saint-Emilion, I learned about the romance behind terroir and site and the whole French scene. I then worked for Andy Erickson in Napa Valley for his consulting agency. And there I learned about micro-vinification and attention to detail. He is an incredible winemaker or consultant winemaker in Napa Valley. And then the mind-blowing experience that I actually had was many years later, we started a collaboration with a winemaker called Pascal Jolivet in Sancerre. And literally when I went out there, I had this image of wine being made by winemakers. I got there and he showed me the lie of the land. And the concept around terroir, it went as far as going out to vineyard blocks, tasting Sauvignon Blanc grapes, picking up the soil, smelling it, getting a feel for it, and then going back into the cellar and tasting wines made from all of those blocks. And every single block had a sense of place, that romance of terroir. And after that, I came back to South Africa with this concept that wine is not made by a winemaker. It's far greater, or a sense of sight and location. And I guess Klein Constantia is far greater than anyone else that makes it. And we can't really change that much. We can harness it and we can guide the wines from a property in a certain direction. Now I'm getting really romantic and philosophical about winemaking, but it is just about learning. And I've been fortunate enough to go back to a couple of vintages. And we've since then started a collaboration, a wine called Matisse together, which has been an incredible journey. Favorite vintage I ever did was actually in Tokai in Hungary. And that just grew my knowledge of sweet wine and the romance around making sweet wine. So they're all really good. And I get back to, after traveling so much and so extensively, it's quite nice to give back to all the young winemakers. So it's quite nice to have winemakers from all over the world come to learn from us and take some of those theories back to their countries.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds like also all of those learnings and your passions are going into what you guys are currently really focusing on at Klein Constantia, both the classic Vin de Constance, but also the Sauvignon Blanc program. So I'd love to get into that. Can you give our listeners who may not be familiar, if they didn't listen to the 5 questions with you, a little background on Klein Constantia? Maybe, I know the history is long, but a quick history, and then bringing it to where you guys are today.
Yes. So in terms of history, so we mentioned 340 years. We've been around since 1685. And the crazy thing is that back in 1685, there was absolutely no other commercial wine made in the New World. The only other wines made in the New World were wines made for church, for communion, and they would have been made in South America and Mexico. So it was the Dutch that kind of pioneered the winemaking in Constantia. And what it comes down to is Simon van der Stel, who was the governor of the Cape in those days, was granted land to create a farm. He went as far as going out and getting soil samples and sending those soil samples, or surveying the soil and getting soil samples. He sent those soil samples back to Europe and he had them analyzed, and he decided to plant his flag in Constantia and make this his farm. In those days, it was pretty much an experimental farm. It was also one of the reasons for the success of it is, if you've been to the Cape, basically we're about an hour's drive from Cape Town. We've got Table Mountain in between us. In Cape Town is where we're not an hour, sorry, 20 minutes drive from Cape Town. We're a suburb of Cape Town. We've got Table Mountain in between us, and in front of us is False Bay. False Bay is where all the ships would have docked at Simonstown, and all these Dutch East India Trading Company ships would have docked in Simonstown, gone through Constantia, past Table Mountain to the fort and the castle in Cape Town. And we had the benefit of these ships using Constantia as a refueling kind of post. So they got vegetables and food and everything from Constantia, as well as their wines. He didn't make Constantia famous. He moved on to find a little wine region called Stellenbosch. So it's a lot less famous than Constantia is. I'm just kidding. It's our most iconic wine region in South Africa, or red wine region in South Africa, most well known throughout the world. So Stellenbosch referring to Van der Stel. So he moved on. It was a guy called Johannes Colleen and Hendrik Klute that started making sweet wine in Constantia. And that's where the whole story starts. I hate telling the story about the past because we got so hung up about telling the story of the past that we actually forgot about the future. So the goal is now to get out there and promote Klein Constantia and say it's one of the greatest wines in the world. And Vin de Constance is definitely almost there, or it is there. But we forgot about that. So we used to talk about all these famous figures that used to drink the wines from Constantia. And just to go into a couple of those, because it's nice to name drop a couple of them, and go into the story behind that, is the sweet wine in Constantia, the key to the success was the fact that it had lots of sugar in it. The sugar formed the preservative. And we didn't then have an understanding for preservatives and winemaking and everything. So wines were made for consumption. And these sweet wines from Constantia were making the voyage all the way back to Europe. And it was a very scarce sought after wine because it was from deepest, darkest Africa and unheard of, really. So the sweet wine of Constantia was spread. We have records of George Washington drinking it. The most famous story that we talk about is Napoleon Bonaparte. When he was on exile in Sant'Elena, he had an allocation of the sweet wine of Constantia every month that he could drink. And the crazy thing is, it was rumored to be the last thing that ever touched his lips. And he was so sickly in his last couple of weeks of life that every night before he went to bed, he asked for a spoonful or thimbleful of the sweet wine of Constantia. So incredible story, so much so that the French love to think that Vin de Constance is a French wine. And then we have Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, the poet Baudelaire, and a couple of other guys who I can't remember right now. But anyway, and I'm getting reminded here, Nelson Mandela used to drink it as well, which I guess it's just closer to the current story of Klein Constantia. So moving on, Klein Constantia continued for a long time, and I'm fortunate to have drunk quite a lot of those old vintages. I've had the 1791, I've had the 1821, I've had the 1875, and then since about 1885, Klein Constantia remained as a farm, and it remained family owned, but we didn't produce wine from the vineyards or commercial wine from the vineyards. And it was only back in 1986 when we started recreating the wines at Klein Constantia. And that's when we recreated the Vin de Constance, and that's when we pioneered the Sauvignon Blanc project. And we were one of the first in South Africa to really pioneer Sauvignon Blanc and get behind it. So those are our core main pillars at Klein Constantia. And through them, the goal is to make one of the great Sauvignon Blancs in the world. And the other goal is to make, when people talk about what is the great new world wine of the world, there's a couple examples of them, but people should always be talking about Vin de Constance being one of them. I think it's there. We just don't have the hundreds of millions of dollars marketing budget that all the other big wine producers have. We're a little niche, small wine producing property in the southern tip of Africa. We can't compete with all the big boys. That's a long story. I should have become a politician.
Yeah, maybe. But I love all the history. And yeah, I was just even preparing for this, rereading the Napoleon part. And then it was funny. He wasn't even like eating in his final days. He just wanted occasional Vin de Constance. So when you're in the modern, basically, form of Klein Constantia, I think also I wanted to touch on, while you guys are recreating some of these things from the past, you're very focused on the sustainability and like kind of the natural aspects of the winery as well. How has like the focus on trying to express, especially with Sauvignon Blanc, played hand in hand with some of these efforts to really keep a biodynamic aspects, organic aspects to the farming? How have those allowed each other to work together well?
Yeah, if I'm going to get into the story about the new ownership and elaborate on that. Klein Constantia was owned by a South African family from 1982 up until 2011. And 2011 is when I got my opportunity to take over Klein Constantia as head winemaker. The new owners of Klein Constantia, I mean, the main shareholders are Czech-American billionaire called Zdeněk Bakala, as well as Charles Harmon, who's an English businessman. We've got two French shareholders, so Bruno Prats from Costa Esnel and Hubert de Bois from Chateau Angelus. Only reason why I'm getting into that is purely because the previous owners created Klein Constantia. They created Vin de Constance, or the new Vin de Constance, but they ran out of money to do it. So the new shareholders came into Klein Constantia with a vision of creating this iconic brand. And they were super clever in the way that they did it. Is the first thing that they invested in was actually the vineyards. And most new shareholders or property owners would come in and they rebuild the winery in their house and try and push tourism and everything. First thing they did is they said, right, guys, let's focus on making the best possible wines. And how do we do that? So the first answer was to pull out all the vineyards that didn't make sense. So pull out anything that didn't work, the Semillon, the Merlots, the Cabernet Francs. Try not make that typical shotgun approach where you make 20 different wines and hope that one is good. We went into the full-on focus approach. So that's basically take a step back, replant everything with the idea of quality focused first. So looking at clones, row direction, literally pull out a block and move the direction of the rows by 15 degrees, purely because that was going to be better for quality. So that was the start. Then we went heavily into, actually to our demise, we went heavily into organic and sustainable farming. And that's how the 2010 Vin de Constance story kind of comes in, is we went too far, too quick. And we pulled out of conventional farming and didn't spray anything, to be honest. And the vines did a full 360 and they didn't use any crop. So we've been since then trying to we had to wean the vines off of the conventional way of farming. And now we're at a point that our vineyards are in an incredible happy kind of balance. So we use 3 techniques of farming at Klein Constantia, and they're all very crucial. The first one we've been doing since 2011 is organic farming. We've had various organic wines that we've produced into the market. The problem with organic wines is you do land up spraying too much copper sulfide into the vineyards, which is actually not the greatest thing to farm with. So we then looked into biodynamic farming. So we're not certified biodynamic, and nor will we become certified biodynamic. We're just looking at principles from biodynamic farming that make sense to our sustainable way of farming. So we've got various, I think 15% of our vineyards are actually biodynamically farmed. We're part of the Biodynamic Association of South Africa. And the goal there is to learn and create that soil life and biome around all the vines and help with the terroir in that way. And then the third most important way of farming at Klein Constantia is the Klein Constantia way. So that's using the organic, using the biodynamic, using as many sustainable practices as possible to create a happy lifestyle. And let's face it, I'm a really lazy winemaker. So if the farmer does a really good job out in the vineyards, the vines are going to express themselves and actually have a personality. And I can just curate the journey without pushing the boundaries too much, which is quite fun as a winemaker. So that's where we're going. We're also WWF BWR champions. And long story short is that means that we are one of the top producers in the world for conservation and ecology. We've gone as far as demarcating, I think it's 25% of the property itself is rehabilitated to natural fynbos or vegetation. We even have a nature reserve on Klein Constantia. So it's pretty cool. We've gone as far as we possibly can. And only when we got that did we start investing in the cellar and the visitor center and everything. So quite a cool journey.
Yeah. Damn. Wow. I don't think there are many people who can claim a nature reserve on their property. Most people point to a bunch of trees and they're like, look, we left some forest.
Well, we're on Table Mountain. We have to, or we can.
Yeah, you guys have the luxury there of a beautiful place with a thriving ecosystem that was there originally. I think where I was going initially, I want to talk about the Vin de Constance, the current iteration and how it's made and all the processes that go into it. But before we get there, I've been thinking most about your Sauvignon Blancs, and I just think it's really interesting that most properties, maybe they have, at least in the US especially, but depending on where you are as well, many like single vineyard or single clone Chardonnays. You see that a lot, or maybe it's their cabs. It was so interesting to me that you had 4 different Sauvignon Blancs, obviously one estate, and then 3 individually named ones. Can you talk a little bit about how they are all so different? And I'm mainly really excited about this because I just had a Pure Song from Dagenau the other week, and I was just looking at his portfolio, and I was like, you don't, outside of that area, see many singular named Sauvignon Blancs from the same producer.
Yeah. Didier Dagenau is my all-time hero, my iconic winemaker that I've always respected and looked up to. He's a legend, or was a legend. So he's inspired me a lot in terms of winemaking. So this is a conversation I usually land up having a single podcast just on Sauvignon Blanc, and I can talk for about 3 hours just on Sauvignon Blanc. I'm a big advocate for getting Sauvignon Blanc to the point that it's respected and seen in the light of being one of the great cultivars of the world. I think in the new world, we've discounted what Sauvignon Blanc actually is. In producers pushing the boundaries, as in planting it in the wrong terroir and making it a cash crop and not really caring about it. So the risk that we have, and it's a really bad risk at the moment being a Sauvignon Blanc producer, is people are starting to say, used to be ADC, it's now ABS, anything but Sauvignon Blanc. And that's purely because it's been done so badly. And so the goal for us is to really step up and say, look, we are one of the great iconic New World producers of Sauvignon Blanc that makes Sauvignon Blanc of substance, of richness, of terroir without having too much of the recipe and the technique to it. So we're fortunate to have an incredible spot. We wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't be so passionate about Sauvignon Blanc if we didn't have this site. And I've grown up on the farm, having a symbiotic relationship with the farm, that Sauvignon Blanc is now in my blood. So we have about 65% of our vineyards are planted to Sauvignon Blanc. We have incredible sites in that it's east-facing and south-facing vineyards. That's basically the prime real estate in South Africa for producing Sauvignon Blanc. And the other thing that we have is the proximity to the ocean. So we've got the really cold Atlantic Ocean that's coming off Antarctica that brings in the cold sea breeze. And then we go into the soil. But in terms of South Africa, we are actually a really warm area. There's very few cool climate areas. There's actually no cool climate regions in South Africa. There's moderately cold to cooler sites in South Africa in a warmer region. And you have to harness those to respect Sauvignon Blanc or to make Sauvignon Blanc properly. Hence the sites on Klein Constantia work really well for us. We've then done a lot of extensive research into the vineyards to see what is going on the soil, how is the soil affecting us. If you look at Dagenham, for example, the work that they do with the selects and all the rest, you can see the site, you can see the terroir, you can see the location. I've actually got some rocks in my cupboard here from Dagenham's vineyards. So we've gone into that, and we've got two different soil types. The one is decomposed granites, and the granites, if you look at it, brings out substance, salinity, saline, umami characters. And the Table Mountain sandstone is the other one, and that just brings out richness and texture to the wine. If the issue that you have is if you use modern day techniques to make Sauvignon Blanc, you lose the terroir, you lose the soil, you lose the effect of the soil itself. So we have completely, and I say this tongue in cheek, because if I go back to university now and I write an exam on Sauvignon Blanc, I would fail purely because I do everything wrong. So we've pushed the boundaries in terms of the way that we make it. And that's purely because we've gotten to the point that we understand each and every single vineyard block, that we can isolate and harness our winemaking techniques to curate the journey of it, to express that site itself. It's 38 different vineyard blocks in Klein Constantia, every single one of them made on their own way. We've gone as far as now we're doing hyperoxidation and crush, and all that means is you don't add any sulfur, you don't add dry ice, you don't protect it from oxidation. And that's something that we've learned through Pascal Jolivet and Sancerre. We then do a wild fermentation of a high soluble content ferment. So basically that means you're not settling the juice, you put it straight into the tank and you let the wild fermentation start by itself. All of these things are big no-nos because everyone is completely paranoid about Sauvignon Blanc volatile thiols breaking down and oxidizing. You then lose all your pretty delicate flavors. We're going the other way, as we're saying, our terroir is so good. Let's get rid of all your finicky, delicate hydrogen sulfides, and let's create a wine that is stable, that has substance, that's going to last for 20 years in the bottle, as opposed to a Sauvignon Blanc that breaks down within 6 months of bottling. You have to put 2 blocks of ice into it and hope for the best. So that's the route that we've gone. And the only way that we can do that is by understanding the vineyards. So every single vineyard block gets its own tank for fermentation. They're harvested separately. There's actually 6 weeks from start to finish in terms of harvesting of the Sauvignon Blancs. If you go to Sancerre, it's only a 2-week harvest. You go to Burgundy, it's a 2-week harvest. So we've got 6 weeks of one grape varietal. That is it. That's how extreme the terroir difference is at Klein Constantia. And if you've got terroir difference like that, you can make wines of substance and complexity from one side. And the best way of explaining it is the way that we often talk about it is you've got a blank canvas, you've got a paintbrush, and you've got one color. And you can create a masterpiece with different shades of that one color. That's all we're trying to do with Sauvignon Blanc at Klein Constantia. So it is noble. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's not discount it. Let's not drink 2026 Sauvignon Blanc now. Let's give it some time. Let's drink it with food. And let's get it to the point that Sancerre or Fumé is at the moment. It's respected for what it actually is, and people don't see it as Sauvignon Blanc. I'll close on that is we need to stop apologizing for making Sauvignon Blanc and actually be proud of it. And we need to get together as a community to actually do that. Yeah, just to mention those wines, we're fortunate now that we've just nailed it in Wine Advocate and Robert Parker that Klein Constantia has received number 1, number 2, and number 3 top scoring Sauvignon Blancs in South Africa. And they've been equal to some of the highest scoring Sauvignon Blancs in the world. So we have those wines. They are of pedigree, and they're doing really well, and they're starting to get recognized for what they actually are.
So what are the differences between the different bottlings, and what are the names of all of them as well?
Sorry, I missed that.
What are the names of the different individual bottlings, and what are the differences?
Yeah, sure. We have the Klein Constantia Estate Sauvignon Blanc, which is our most important wine. It's a representation from the whole entire state. So that's a blend of 38 different vineyard blocks. Then you go into a more zoomed in approach. So we've got Matisse, which is our joint venture that we've had with Pascal Jolivet and Sancerre. So that is an extreme out there, different style of making Sauvignon Blanc. And that was our R&D project for the rest of the Sauvignon Blancs. So that's Matisse. And then we go into the single vineyards. So we actually have 6 single vineyards of of Sauvignon Blanc and Klein Constantia. The most recognized one that we've had on the market for many years is called the Paddeblokker. Paddeblokker just refers to the horse vineyard in Afrikaans and talks about the horses that used to till the soil on the site itself. So Paddeblokker is a single vineyard on Klein Constantia. It is iconic. It was always very aromatic, very powerful, very pungent in flavors. And that's really niche. And we only make 3,000 bottles of that. Yeah. So that's single vineyard. And then we have the other 5 single vineyards on Klein Constantia that we've realized in the last 10 years that have equal kind of potential as Paddeblokker. So 5 single vineyards, each and every single one of them harvested separately, vinified separately. And then we go through and we barrel fermented, barrel aged. We choose the best barrels and we put them into a blend called the Clara. So Clara is a lot more richer, a lot more powerful, a lot more voluptuous in terms of flavors. So Estate Sauvignon Blanc is what we do. Matisse is out there in flavor. Paddeblokker is the iconic single vineyard from Klein Constantia. And then Clara is that out there, sommelier, geeky, competing with Chardonnay style Sauvignon Blanc that we make.
Wow. Yeah. That's, I was reading about them, but it's hard to really conceptualize until now that you've narrowed it all down. That's fascinating. Want to do a flight of all of them now.
I have to try them.
Well, I know you guys produce a number of other wines as well, but I want to pivot back to the Vin de Constance now. For anybody who is a Tokay lover or a Sauternes lover, can you just give us like a brief overview of what makes Vin de Constance different in terms of its unique flavor profile, and then maybe a little bit about how it's made?
Yeah, sure. So the most important thing about Vin de Constance is it's unique. There's no other wine style like this in the world. This style is a recreation of the old wine, first created in 1737 in Constantia. What has happened is we've gone into extensive research to see the way that the wine would have been made. Hence, we opened some of the old bottles and we've looked into it. And the old cultivars that were planted in Constantia were Chenin Blanc, Semillon, Pontac. So Pontac is a red varietal that has red juice as well. Muscat, Le Petit Grand, Francignan, or Muscat Blanc. You can use any of those names for it. And then there's a mutation of the Muscat Blanc, as in it's a red Muscat, so a Muscat Blanc that went red. So those were the cultivars used in the old days. Looking into it, the only one that currently works for Vin de Constance is Muscat de Francignan for us at Klein Constantia, and that's purely for its ability to raisin out. So going into its uniqueness is it's not a botrytis wine. It's not an ice wine. It is not a straw wine. It's a wine that, because the Muscat de Francignan has got such thick skin walls, is able to last in the vineyards for a very long time without rotting away. So it raisins on the vines naturally. We then go out and we harvest for up to 2 months for the sweet wine. So we'll start off super early in the season in the bush vines, and we pick the very high acidic berries, and we go riper until the point that we go out with a team. And we've got a specialized team at Klein Constantia that's been with us for many years, and they know exactly what we're looking for. So I'll go out with the farm manager, and we'll literally look at a bunch. We'll show the guys a bunch. You explain to them how much percentage of raisins or how many percentage of raisins you want on that bunch. And they'll go out for that whole entire day and look for a bunch with 30% raisins on, or 40% or 50% or 60%. Ideally, we're trying to create some complexity and some balance between sugar and acidity and I guess at a later stage, alcohol from those. So we'll go through 25 different batches over 2 months. We'll pick all of those. We make them completely separately in their own way. And in terms of the technique here, it also makes it quite unique in that we are macerating the skin. So we'll go through and do everything that all the fancy producers do. We'll do berry sorting, bunch sorting, de-stemming, put it into a tank. And here's where it's quite different is we'll do 1 week cold maceration on the skins in a specialized Vin de Constance tank. And during that week, we harness the use of a non-Saccharomyces yeast that forms your bioprotector. And during that first week of maceration on the skins, you create a lot of complexity, you break down a lot of flavor, you extract a lot of flavor from the muscat berries. We then warm up the tank and we inoculate it with a very strong strain of yeast, and we'll ferment the skins for another week. So 2 weeks on the skins, we'll then press it. And actually, because of the fermentation, pressing process is very quick. And it's purely because it's fermented and the cap has risen to the top and you're able to get all the juice separated from the bottom. Then we'll take those 25 different batches and we'll start our form of balance, the journey for balance. And we'll take all of those components and we'll start to blend them together numerous times throughout the fermentation process to give you the perfect balance between sugar, alcohol, and acidity. The early harvest stuff's got some lovely acidity and lovely freshness. The late stuff is just pure sugar. The middle stuff is where you want to be, but you want the complexity of both sides in it. So we'll blend it constantly between all the different tanks. Every morning I come in at 3:30 in the morning. I go through and taste every single tank. And then that day we'll blend according to the way that we see the fermentation going. If we get that the fermentation stops completely naturally by itself, it's unable to ferment any further. And that's purely because sugar and alcohol form the preservative. We don't have to stop the fermentation with sulfur or filtration. So the wine stops naturally, generally at 165 grams per litre of sugar with 14% alcohol to 14.5% alcohol. That is the sweet spot for Vin de Constance if we get that right, with a decent amount of acidity to it. So that's the start. That's the first form of balance. Then I have to get into the point that Muscat de Frontignan as a very young wine is not very nice to drink. It's very primary. It's very aromatic. It's almost too overpowering. You need the influence of oxygen and barrel aging to evolve it into a secondary format. So my next form of balance is just the form of balance where it goes from primary flavors to secondary flavors, and you try and prevent any tertiary flavors. The only way to do that is you put it into barrels. So the fermentation stops by itself. We'll then put it into barrel. We leave it in 50% new oak barrels, 500-liter barrels from Austria, France, Hungary for 1.5 years. In that first 1.5 years, you're getting microoxidation happening. So you take it from primary muscat, Turkish delight flavors to secondary, which is more delicate, perfumed, aromatic, and just beautiful in flavors. At that point, if you go any further, it goes into tertiary flavors. It's not really nice for Vin de Constance. So we take it out of barrel and we put them into massive wooden vats, so foudre as we call them. They're 4,500 liter foudre with very thick wooden staves, and those prevent any other oxygen exchange. So it prevents it from going to tertiary flavors, but allows for integration of oak and further flavor development. So after those 3 years in barrel, you create a wine that is noble for the greatest people to drink out there. But then it takes about 6 months to blend. And that is crazy. We'll go through every single barrel, go through every single batch, and kind of fine tune that perfect blend that has a component that it's a sweet wine that doesn't taste sweet. It's a sweet wine that the sugar forms the flavor. It doesn't form the sucrosity. I think sweet wines these days are becoming quite a dying wine, and that's purely because they're all too sweet. Everyone is they're playing it safe, and sugar's the safe part of it, that they just pick and the sugar's there, and they think that people like to drink the sugar. People don't like that anymore. You want to have balance. So by blending and getting all those components right and getting all that, Vin de Constance is a white wine. It's almost like a dried white wine with a lot of flavor that is versatile enough that should be able to go with any part of the meal. It shouldn't just be dessert. It can be with a starter, it can be with the main course. It's not an occasion wine. It is also not, and I have to stop people here, it's not a collector's wine. It's a wine that we want people to drink. Eat it with food, drink it with a cigar, or chill around the fire and drink Vin de Constance. There's no better experience. And that's what makes this wine so special.
Nice. So you can almost, no, I love that. Actually, I'm going to have to follow up offline with master of wine questions for my exam with that non-sack cold soak. But anyway, getting back to not that nerdy of wine talk, the use of in the course of a meal or when you're enjoying Vin de Constance, it's almost more like a Spätlese Riesling or like a late harvest Tokai or something, with something that just has a little bit of that off dry, but it's just balanced with the acid. You would,
not quite as sweet as a botrytis wine, but also just depends on which one and who's doing it.
Yeah,
I do find that people making sweet wines these days are pretty much doing it. I have the worst job in the world as a winemaker. I make two of the most least sexy wine varietals at the moment, Sauvignon Blanc and sweet wine. And we're trying to pioneer it and make it great.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're here. I enjoyed both of them, that they're done well. So we'll together, we'll bring them back. So Sauvignon Blanc, the Vin de Constance, those are both the kind of flagships of the estate. Are you guys, I saw you guys have a fairly other broad portfolio. Are those mostly wines that you sell
in South Africa? Or are they widely distributed globally? Some of the red wines, the other white wines as well?
Yes, we have one really exciting project in Stellenbosch. So we've realized that we're a cool climate region. We're more suited to making white wines in Constantia, or in our part of Constantia for that matter. So we started a project in 2005 with two Bordeaux legends, Bruno Prats from Castellet and Hubert de Bois from Chateau Angelus. It was a red wine project to recreate an iconic red wine in South Africa, in Stellenbosch, the iconic region, to do it. So it's a little property called Anwilke. We only make two wines there, the first label Anwilke and the second label called Ugava. It's not a Bordeaux blend, unfortunately. Merlot and Cabernet Franc just don't work in South Africa. I think we're just too hot and dry for it. So we've supplemented the Merlot with Syrah. So it's a Cabernet Syrah-based blend. We've got Petit Verdot and Malbec planted on the property. And this kind of comes back to my luck as a young winemaker at Klein Constantia. When I took over as a young winemaker here, I had the backing of Bruno Prats and Hubert de Bois, literally on speed dial, now on WhatsApp to ask any questions. So they helped with concept, with design, with winemaking, with issues. There are very few people in the world that can boast two of the greatest winemakers in the world as mentors and backups. I think between the three of us, we have way over 100 years of winemaking experience, and I have very few of those. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So are those wines widely available, say, here in the US? Can we find those?
Yeah, most of our wines are available globally. So you can get the core Klein Constantia range in the US, no problems. I guess depending on the state. In Europe, we're very popular. We're well distributed in the UK, in France, in Denmark, and all the rest. So we've got a really good following out there. A couple of other wines, we do have wines that form more part of our niche range. So our wines that are for the geeky wine lovers or the sommeliers or people like that. And the Clara and Powder Blocker fall perfectly into that. But another one that we are equally excited about and super passionate about going forward is our Chardonnay. And we've always looked at Klein Constantia and decided to focus on Sauvignon Blanc and sweet wine, but there are certain pockets of terroir on Klein Constantia that are perfectly suited to Chardonnay. And hence we've had it since 1986, but we've started to focus on making a very small amount of Chardonnay from the property. It's actually Hubert de Bois' passion project at Klein Constantia. He's pushing the boundaries on Chardonnay. So he flies out every year for 2 weeks to help out with the winemaking of it. We go out into the vineyards every day, we taste, and we decide when to harvest it. So that's a big project that we have at the moment, and we're pushing that. And then there's some fun wines. As a winemaker, you have to keep it fun. So we've got a little rosé that we make called Cuvée Annabelle, which we primarily started as a wine for the owner, Steniek Bakala. This is named after his daughter. We had a Riesling, but we've stopped producing that now. And that's purely because of focus, and more focus. And then the other one is the MCC, or our Cap Classique, or our Method Champenois style made from Chardonnay as well. That's just fun. That's to celebrate Klein Constantia. But everyone should have to come to Klein Constantia to visit, to taste all these wines and see where they come from and see what the kind of concept is around it. I think that's all the wines we make. I think there are a lot more. At some point, we were making 10 different Sauvignon Blancs, which is absolutely nutty and crazy. We have refined that and brought it down to just the 4.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I actually had some of the sparkling as part of my exam preparation recently, but yeah, it was really cool. It was fun. It was a flight with wines from all over the world, and everybody really liked it.
Nice. Did really well.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's like the Chardonnays, we make 3,000 bottles of that. Last year, it made into Wine Spectator's top 100 wines of the world. It's like, come on, guys. Vin de Constance is made into the top 10, but this is a little niche wine that we do, and it was in the top 100 wines in the world. Incredible.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we'll have to check that out. Is it made more in? Is that made in a unique style, or is your own style too, or is it like what is the style of the Chardonnay? If somebody is it more New World, Old World leaning? What do you think?
It's tough to say. I started off making Chardonnay like I made Sauvignon Blanc, which was a very hands-off approach. And I very quickly realized that Chardonnay, it needs terroir and it needs site, but it needs a lot of winemaking interventions. So I would say it has gone more into that New World approach where you get that really good balance with oak and citrus without ever oaking it.
Yeah. Yeah, the classic way a lot of people describe South African wines as a whole is basically kind of that New World fruit ripeness with like the minerality and finish that you find in like some of the more savory notes of an Old World, even though New World and Old World terms are now going out of style. But cool. So looking forward for Klein Constantia, and I also had another random question about work on the vineyards themselves. I was watching, I can't remember a while back, it was some documentaries. They were in South Africa talking about the different issues that they might have in the vineyards. And I feel like the pests in terms of like animals and other issues are a lot different than they are in the rest of the world. What do you guys have? Are like baboons an issue, or like what are some of the issues that maybe like other countries don't have to face out in the vineyard?
Our biggest issue that we have is actually tourists. They start, our block of Vin de Constance muscat is planted next to the driveway when you drive in. And from my house, I can see all the tourists stopping and eating all the grapes. I need a shotgun or something. I'm just kidding. Most expensive grapes on the farm, they all stop there and eat all of them. No, but the big issue that we have is baboons in South Africa, especially in Constantia. We are pretty much in their territory here. So we're trying to get to a point that we can live together. So during a harvest, we have a team of people that just keep them out the vineyards. Otherwise, if a troop of baboons get stuck into a block, they can destroy that block within 2 days. And it's not just that year's crop that they'll destroy. They rip off all the shoots as well. So that's the next year's crop as well that they destroy. So we're very protective. We've got guys that work, we've got a team that works 7 days a week. And they basically just chase them off the farm as much as they can. During the winter, we allow them to come onto the farm a lot more. The food and resources up in the mountain becomes a lot more scarce. They're at my house almost every single day, ripping up the garden and out in the vineyards and stuff. But we are in their territory, so we have to learn how to deal with them. The issue is, I think a lot of guys are forcing it too much, and they're getting too frustrated about it. As soon as you learn to deal with them properly, they're actually not that bad. We've gone as far as we've put in a biodynamic tower on top of the farm that is supposed to chase the baboons away. But it actually only works if you believe in it. So you have to believe in it for it to work. So that's the big problem that we have. We don't have the massive issue of birds, although what we've done is we promote the steppe buzzards and forest buzzards. So we've put up a whole lot of natural perching sites for the steppe buzzards and forest buzzards, and they form as our protection against birds. So they scare away all the white-eyed starlings and everything. So that's a great technique for that. And then we don't have massive pressure for downy mildew or powdery mildew or anything like that. So it's less of an issue on Klein Constantia. So we're fortunate to be where we are.
Yeah. Wow, I hadn't heard the buzzards approach before. I like that. It's cool.
When I worked in Turkey and Hungary, during harvest, you'd look up in the sky, and the sky would be black from birds. So they had gas cannons and hunters with shotguns and everything to keep the birds out the vineyards. We're not that extreme. I mean, we're so lucky on the farm that we have such a sense of biodiversity. We call them rooikat, which is a lynx. We've got a couple lynx on the farm. We've got lovely snakes. We've got fish eagle. So we've got a lot of porcupine. We used to have a lot of deer on the farm as well, but I think the last 15 years I haven't seen one. And Wilco, we still have deer walking around grazing in the vineyard, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that is pretty cool. Although I know some people have issues with deer eating their shoots as well. So depending on the time of year, I guess it could be cool.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. So you guys are celebrating, is it the 340th anniversary this year? Is that right?
Yeah, 340 years.
Oh, wow. Milestone year. What are you guys looking forward to or in the next 5-10 years? What is on the innovation roadmap? Is it further understanding the soils, defining your style? What will the next 5 to 10 years bring?
The big goal is to continue to push the boundaries for Vin de Constance and put it onto the stage of being one of the great wines of the world. So that is the iconic goal for us. Rather than when people are saying what is the great new world wine of the world, it should be one of the greatest wines of the world, and Vin de Constance should be up there. So that's the big goal, is to get more people as well to start drinking sweet wine and Sauvignon Blanc. So that's a big push. And then, so with the 340-year anniversary, we actually released an incredible product called the Vin de Constance Special Release. It was a 2010 vintage, which is actually a 15-year barrel aging Vin de Constance, which is a completely out there, unique style of Vin de Constance. So that was a great way to celebrate the 340-year anniversary. Let's see what the next 10 years bring. There's so much of a journey still happening. We're only at the start of our journey, and with pushing the boundaries in terms of sustainable farming and everything, we should be insisting that we're here for the next 350,000 years or whatever. And we're at that pinnacle point at Klein Constantia right now that what we are doing is paving that journey. And for me, it's incredible to be part of that journey and to be entrusted with that.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Lovely to be on the show. Thank you very much.
All right. That was our interview with Matt Day, head winemaker at Klein Constantia. I hope everybody learned a little bit more about the winery and South African wines. I'll put a link to their website in the show notes so you can learn more and possibly discover where to purchase the wines as well. I'll also put a link to that South African wine history book in the notes as well if you want to learn more about the area. But for now, that is our episode for this week. We'll be back with another 5 questions on Friday and a full episode next week. Cheers.